Deep inside the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, newly discovered artifacts are undergoing preservation. These are relics from a nearly forgotten war crime, when American GIs were sent to work and die in one of Adolf Hitler's most secretive concentration camps. Of the artifacts here, none are more precious than a diary kept by one of the survivors who documented his story. When he began writing his secret diary, GI medic Tony Acevedo was just 20 years old. Tony's was one of several diaries kept by the men of Berga. Each chronicles a war crime nearly lost to history.
The year 1945 was beginning in an atmosphere of doubt and cruel anxiety. This was the Battle of the Bulge, the battle that came so dangerously close to crushing the life.
For each GI, their journey to Berga began in the frigid winter of 1944, in the Ardennes forest along the Belgian-German frontier. The Ardennes is the quietest sector of the front, with forests considered so dense that no German offensive could take place here.
We were in foxholes opposite a German pillbox. We'd watch them, they'd watch us. Nothing was happening.
One morning on the 16th of December, all we heard is incoming shells coming over the trees. We didn't know what hit us.
A 250,000 German troops, including crack SS Panzer units, take the Americans by complete surprise.
You could see the German troops advancing.
And we're on this hill, and every time you get a tree burst, you had these slivers. Each one was like miniature spears. So we had guys that were actually killed by a twig.
Within hours of the German attack, Tony Acevedo is the only medic in his platoon left alive.
I heard, medic, medic. One was hit, had his leg severed. The ligaments was holding the leg, so I had to cut the leg off.
We knew, though, that we were in serious trouble when they came in with flame-throwing tanks.
Finally, we ran out of ammunition.
We had three options. You could freeze to death, you could starve to death, or you could surrender.
The Bulge marks the greatest single defeat in U.S. military history.
We were picked to take whatever German prisoners there were in our trucks. We had about, I would say, maybe 20 of them. We stopped. The Germans who were on the truck got off the truck, they took our guns, and they were our guards. That's how that happened.
For those who are captured, the transition from warrior to prisoner is stark.
Told us to remove our boots off. We walked down the hill barefooted in the snow. The snow was up to our waist.
They lined us up and marched us to the rear. I can remember it. I was thirsty as hell. And I stepped out of line to grab a icicle. The first time I met a rifle butt. German guard let me have it good. And I realized at that moment that my life had changed a lot. I no longer had any control.
Some 23,000 Americans soon find themselves aboard trains heading deep into Nazi Germany.
They put anywhere from 60 to 80 guys in a car. You were packed in. You almost had to exhale and inhale in unison.
As low-priority cargo, they're locked in the rail cars for days, where they endure repeated attack by Allied flyers unaware that the trains below are packed with fellow Americans.
That was the most excruciating thing I've ever gone through, because if any bomb went through that thing, you were cremated. There's no other way to get out of it.
We were strafed. 1 minute we're standing, and the next minute there are holes coming in through the car. The bullets would go everywhere. They start at one end of the car and go down the line. But we were packed in so tight, you couldn't even lay the poor guy down. There was no place for him. They were hit. They cry out or whatever, that's what they did.
Soon the POWs arrive at Stalag 9B, where it becomes clear that the Germans intend to classify them by religion.
They had American soldiers acting as clerks. You were being registered in almost like you were going into a hotel or whatever, only slightly different. They got down to name, rank, serial number, so on, and religion.
I said, I give name, rank, and serial number. He said, no, you have to give the religion. I said, we don't have to do that. He said, the Germans want it.
And they came back and reported that at the next roll call, all Jews will be expected to step forward.
What many GIs don't consider is that they carry on them the mark of their religion.
These are the dog tags that were issued. And in this upper left-hand corner is letter H, which stands for Hebrew. And they did this with the idea being that if you were casualty in combat, they knew what religion, whether to put a cross or a Jewish star or whatever on your gravesite.
For Jewish GIs heading into Nazi captivity, this poses a danger many don't fully comprehend.
If it was known at the higher levels that Jews were in danger, they didn't make any effort to tell those lower in the chain of command that this is something they should take into consideration before sending Jews into battle with a big, essentially like a Star of David almost, labeling them for the Nazis to mistreat if they caught them.
Many barracks leaders instruct Jewish GIs to keep their religion secret. But some fear their own dog tags might give them away.
I got German guards all around me. I can't just throw the damn things away. And I worried about the fact that some guy was able to pick up the tags and look at them and see.
Then they kept calling names. What are they calling? What is that? What is all that? They're calling names out, and it sounds like most of them are Jews. And I had several guys I know were anti-Semites in my outfit. There were a lot of them. And one in particular I didn't care for. He was from Connecticut. Tall, good-looking guy. Forgot his name. He says to me, "Don't go down there." I get a little emotional. He says, "We'll take care of you. Stay here."
The orders came down by the Germans to identify 350 American soldiers for forced labor.
Their problem was that they could only get about 80 Jews.
They then filled in the rest of those with people who they felt were troublemakers, or maybe they looked Jewish, or their name sounded Jewish.
Tony Acevedo is chosen because as a Mexican-American, he looks Jewish to German eyes.
I felt shaky. And I didn't know exactly what was happening and for what purpose they had selected me.
The day the American POWs arrive in Berga, Dresden is still smoldering from Allied firebombing that has killed tens of thousands of German civilians.
When we got off the train, and marched through the town. I remember that the people on the sides were spitting at us and jeering and whatnot.
Like many concentration camps, Berga is no secret to the Germans who live here.
Most Germans were complicit in some way. The fact that if you go to most of these camps, you go to Mauthausen, you go to Dachau, you see that the Germans were right there. The community was there. They knew. They could smell it. They could see the ash. They were aware that things were going on and chose to look the other way.
Minutes from the train station, the GIs get their first glimpse of the European Jews already working and dying in the camp.
And this mass of humanity, all in these blue and white striped pajamas. The skinniest human beings I'd ever seen. I'd never seen people that thin before. They're still alive. And their faces were all pinched, but their eyes were huge. And it wasn't a sound, not a sound. And they just stared at us like we were from another world or something.
"14-year-old Hungarian Jew Paul Frankel sees his first Americans while working in the camp kitchen.
One day I went there and what do I see? American prisoners of war. So we brought the soup out of the kitchen, took it down over there to the gate.
He didn't understand English, but and I wasn't the greatest Yiddish speaker, but I knew enough to get by. He asked me if I was Jewish. I said, yes, ich bin a Yid. And then he told me who he was. He couldn't believe that there were Americans there who were going through what he was going through.
It was absolutely devastating for us prisoners to see this. We felt like, my God, if they even got the Americans, that means we're lost.
And they looked like human beings, not like us. We were not like humans anymore.
Running the camp is a German National Guard sergeant named Edwin Metz. Metz is fanatic about imposing subhuman conditions on the inmates he oversees.
He was an incredibly cruel and vicious person. His treatment of the prisoners was extremely harsh and clearly violated all the stipulations laid out in the Hague and Geneva Conventions on the treatment of prisoners of war.
Norman Fellman recalls his first encounter with Metz while suffering from intense dysentery atop one of the camp latrines.
I remember my guts blowing up, expanding to the point where I thought I was going to blow up. He comes over to me and he said, "Gehen rein." And I told him, "Nix, I'm not finished. Not finished." And he pulls out his Luger. He puts it at my forehead. And he told me, "Nix, gehen rein." I said, "Go ahead and shoot, you SOB." And I didn't use initials. I said, "Because I'm not finished." He put his gun away and he walked away.
Unknown to the American POWs, Berga isn't just any Nazi concentration camp. It's part of a secret program to use slaves to build underground factories for Hitler's rockets, jet fighters, and synthetic fuel.
They were going to create a hydrogenation plant there to transform brown coal into fuel, to keep their tanks, their trucks, their aircraft moving.
These are Hitler's wonder weapons, instruments the Fuhrer believes will turn the tide of war. Soon after arriving, the Americans are marched into Berga's tunnels. And if you venture deep into the forest, you can still find the tunnel entrances today. 66 years since his liberation, GI medic Tony Acevedo has returned with his 2 sons.
We never thought we'd get to see this place, huh?
Tony's own father never even believed the tunnels existed. He thought they were a fantasy of Tony's traumatized mind.
Papá, ¿me viste donde estuve? Para que no creas que te estoy mintiendo, hijo de María Bonita.
Here are your 2 sons to be a witness to it.
Right there, there's a tunnel.
I'm gonna go up and take a closer look. Be careful when you watch there.
Yeah.
Watch the rod over here.
Now, at the time, they didn't know exactly why they were being told to do this.
Some of the fellas said, why there's tunnels? What are they trying to do, get gold?
It'd be a pre-measured amount of gunpowder poured into a heavy wax paper, cut a certain size, rolled up, and then you would put a series of these into each hole that would set off the blast. Our job was to go in before the dust had begun to settle.
And we were told we had to pick up the rocks and put them in there and dump them into the river.
They were just basically a 24-hour-a-day operation, working in shifts, going into various tunnels, blowing them up, bringing all the debris and the dirt out of it, dumping it into the river, going back in, blowing it up over and over and over.
So during that whole time, was there any source of food or?
Nothing.
Nothing?
No, they wouldn't feed them here in the tunnels or give them water at all.
Inhaling all of this dust and soot and working with the explosives, they were extremely malnourished, they were exhausted.
Us medics requested to bring out the fellas that were dying of inhalation of the dust. And I would carry them out so that we could take them back to the barracks. They were getting sicker and sicker and vomiting.
Some guys had coughs, they were coughing terribly. There were guys spitting up blood.
It was just amazing to me how quickly we lost strength.
The Nazis had a notion of what they called Vernichtung durch Arbeit, which is essentially extermination through labor. That they would work these prisoners to death, literally, giving them the minimal amount of food rations to keep them alive.
They estimated that maybe 400 calories a day.
Soon, malnutrition and dysentery are rampant. The GI death rate at Berga is about to soar.
They'd wake us up for a roll call. We'd go out in the cold and line up, and we'd have to, our serial numbers, or our German numbers, 23207, 23207. That's how I had to say it. This happened several times a night. And I remember looking at the stars when it was a beautiful night, and I say, gee, I wonder if my mother and sister are looking at that.
Closer to town lies Berga's last remaining barrack. More than 200 Americans once lived, slept, and died in this cramped space.
till I see. Yeah. This looks familiar. You remember moments of where you get the whiff of a feeling and you think, well, are you dreaming? God, this is it.
As a medic, Tony was trained to care for his buddies. But the Germans gave him no tools or medicine to do his job.
When they came back from the caves, they kept on getting dirty and dirty and dirty and dirtier. And so the lice kept on growing and growing and growing.
When we went to bed, that's when they start crawling.
And you'd get to be so exhausted that you slept through it. It didn't matter. They could bite you. You were feeding them. They were eating the damn sight better than you were.
Eventually, some GIs became so malnourished, they began eating the lice off their own bodies.
There was a lot of coughing and whatnot. They'd be crying. Sometimes a guy'd be calling for his mother. In the beginning, you heard all that stuff. Toward the end, you didn't hear it. You didn't see it. Things would happen around you, and you would never, all you could see is that little tunnel in front of you, that next few minutes.
As much as Tony pleaded, guards like Sergeant Metz forced deathly ill GIs back to work time and time again. One incident and a friend named David Young linger in his memory to this day.
He couldn't make it anymore into the tunnels. He was weak. And he was in the barracks. And I told the German, please don't let him go back in because he's not capable. He cannot withstand it anymore. So the German went back and got full bucket of water, ice water, and threw it on him, and he died instantly. That's how bad the condition was with some of the fellows. It makes me feel numb to think about this. The silence keeps you to remember.
Within a few weeks of their arrival, the GIs of Berga face a new reality. Like the European Jews here, they are quickly becoming grim statistics in Hitler's final solution. But for Berga's Hungarian Jews, the journey into hell had begun much earlier, and well before the Americans had even landed at Normandy.
Der sich als Träger seines besten Blutes fühlen und dieses Wissen zur Führung der Nation erhoben hat und entschlossen ist, diese Führung zu behalten, wahrzunehmen und nicht herabzugehen.
My father had a radio hooked up to a battery, and he used to listen to Hitler. screaming, you know.
Heute müssen wir Selbstmusterung halten und abstoßen, was sich als schlecht erwiesen hat. Und deshalb es lebe die nationalsozialistische Bewegung! Es lebe Deutschland!
Spring 1944. Hungary is the last surviving bastion of European Jewry. Anti-Semitic laws exist, but Hungarian leaders have denied Nazi demands for the kind of mass deportations that have taken place elsewhere in Europe. For Jewish teenagers like Paul Frankel, relations with his Gentile neighbors couldn't be better.
I was constantly hanging out with them. I was in their houses. I even went to the choir in a church there, and I sang. I went up to rang the church bell. It was a very integrated community.
But by March of 1944, Hitler loses patience. Hungarian fascists are installed in power, and the German army marches in.
One day, I walked out on the street.
We saw German tanks and armored vehicles and motorcycles.
My mother and I and my father, we knew this German priest. And these German soldiers went down there. And my mother called the woman and asked, "Why did the Germans come to see you?" She said, "I know, but I can't tell you." "Why can't you tell me?" "Because it's a secret."
That one night our building was surrounded, and they had loudspeakers, and the announcement was, "You have 15 minutes to pack one suitcase per family, and you better be out of the building or we come and get you." So my mom threw a few things in a suitcase, and off we went.
Most Jews are sent to factory yard holding grounds, where their bags are pillaged of family treasure by Hungarian police.
And they started, person by person, calling them into a building, and they beat the hell out of them. You could hear the screams. "Where's your gold? Where's your money? Where?" It was a disaster.
Many receive bogus postcards from recently deported relatives, assuring them the work and food in Germany is good. But it's all a lie.
You were absolutely innocent. We didn't know. We still thought we were going to Germany to work. We didn't realize what plans they had in mind. They locked the doors, and there we were. I was in there with my mother, my father, my brother Gabriel, and the train took off.
By May, the first trainloads of Jews depart to their true destination, Auschwitz in Poland.
We had no food, we had no water, we were scared. Some of the older people died on the train. Other people simply lost their minds. They went crazy.
Train stopped. Next thing I knew, I look out the window, and there are these people come up in striped uniforms.
And beyond them were German soldiers with guard dogs and guns. And the prisoners were running up and down the train,
screaming, "Get out, get out," and they opened the door.
Between May 15th and July 7th, 145 trainloads of Hungarian Jews arrive in Auschwitz, carrying 430,000 men, women, and children.
They were saying, "Go to the left, go to the left." Once in a while, they said, "Go to the right."
To the right means life. To the left, the gas chamber.
I'm holding on to my mother's hand, and we're walking.
My grandma, my brother who was 11, they were immediately told to go to the left. My mother and I, we were told to go to the right. And at this point, my mother said to me, "Paul, I have to go with your grandmother and little brother because I have to look after them, and you're the adult in the family right now. She gave me a hug.
Did you get to say goodbye to your mom?
No. No. Never saw her again, ever.
Even after selection, most fail to comprehend the truth behind the burning smokestacks on the edge of camp.
And the smell was horrendous.
And these chimneys were spewing out fire and an ash. And this was summer, middle of the summer. And I really could not understand what they were eating, not the barracks. What are they eating here?
You could see the smokestacks. You could see the smokestacks. But you didn't know what it was. I didn't know.
So after a few minutes, I went back to see this guy. I said, tell me, what's those chimneys? What's this all about? He says, you don't know? I said, no. He says, well, it's your family going up in smoke. I didn't believe him. I figured this poor guy, he lost his marbles. What do you mean my family going up in smoke? What is he talking about?
Of the 430,000 Hungarians brought to Auschwitz, most are gassed within minutes of getting off the train. For the few who survive, slave labor, Buchenwald, and Berga await. Laborers in Nazi slave camps often died within days of commencing work. By April of 1945, the Americans had been at the Berga concentration camp just over 6 weeks. Miraculously, 326 GIs are still clinging to life, while literally being starved to death. Many turned to stealing other men's bread.
I saw guys going after manure and picking out seeds and eating the seeds.
The conditions at Berga soon numbed GIs to the suffering around them.
They would line up, stack the dead bodies right in a line opposite where you stood while they waited to give you what you would call chow. It could be somebody laying there that you were buddied with and talked with the day before, and you didn't see him. You would eat that food just like he wasn't there.
Incredibly, the will to survive and even to fight the enemy remains strong. In the tunnels, this means doing everything they can to slow construction.
And one of the guys could understand German and told us that he overheard a guy telling another one, the crap began to happen when the Americans got there.
Almost daily, sabotage charges misfire. Outside the tunnels, GIs stage accidents that topple carts into the river.
When you threw the lever, the centrifugal force would make that thing go around, and it would go down at such a rate as it would take the whole cart into the water. And they would go mad. And everybody there got a beating. I don't give a damn who you were, you got a beating. And nobody escaped it, but it kept on happening.
As the death toll at Berga rises, the GIs become increasingly desperate. But the Allies are getting close, and the American POWs encourage one another to hang on just a little bit longer.
The American Third Army pushes farther into the crumbling German citadel, racing other Allied armies to Berlin. Burning and wrecked Nazi equipment, as well as their dead, litter the road as the armored divisions speed on to engulf a demoralized enemy.
Bombers were over every night. Sometimes it would be an hour to 2 hours for the planes to stop flying.
By early April 1945, they knew the fronts were getting closer. and they were all getting very excited about rumors of liberation. And the Germans made the decision to send the men on a forced death march out of Berga to stay ahead of the Allies as they got closer.
On the eve of the death march, the GIs have been at Berga for nearly 2 months. Most are on the verge of collapse.
They started marching us, and the Americans were also taken. Every time someone slowed down, couldn't walk anymore, was weak, they were shot.
For reasons unknown, the GIs who can't walk are sometimes allowed to ride a vegetable cart, pushed by those who can.
They had a large cart that some of the sicker men were put on, and they would march 10 kilometers a day, 25 kilometers a day.
You could get maybe 8 or 9 people on there with some degree of comfort. They would put 30, 35, sometimes 40 people on that cart. Invariably, at least 1 or more people on the bottom would suffocate.
They were just piling bodies on top of bodies. And the fellows on the bottom, I knew, had to suffer.
With each passing day, the GIs bury more of their own.
The earth was too hard to dig. It was cold ice. And we tried to dig, couldn't dig. And we just laid them out, put some dirt on them, and we left. And I always regretted not taking his dog tag to know who he was.
Before long, Norman Feldman's leg is so infected, he can no longer walk.
And that morning when I got up, my boot had burst. My leg had swollen to about 5 sizes bigger. Pus was running out of the holes in it.
In a separate column, Berga's European Jews are faring even worse than the Americans.
There was no food. So we ate leaves off the trees, grass. We took the grass off the ground and chewed it.
And when the European prisoners come upon a steep hill, many can't make the climb. Sensing danger, Paul Frankel hurries to the front of the line as hundreds are shot behind him.
I just wanted to survive, and I thought that if I stayed in the front row, first one in the front, I would survive.
Hours later, the GIs arrive at the same hill.
We saw a mass of people murdered, shot, children, women, innocent people.
It was the worst, probably the worst scene I've ever seen in my life. But it wasn't me.
April 19th, 1945. The sound of artillery fire is on the horizon. The GIs know the American army is close. Huddled in a barn, survivors make a pact for the following day.
We were dropping really like flies. The word went through that when they try to get us up in the morning, we don't move.
In the coming hours, German commander Edwin Metz privately decides to abandon his post.
He doesn't want to be caught with these American prisoners of war, realizing what the possible consequences are for him. So he tries to escape. He disappears on a bike.
By sunrise, Norman Feldman awaits another day on the cart.
I was laying in a grass area, waiting to be loaded onto the cart, hoping like hell I wouldn't be the first ones on it.
And in the morning, sure enough, we hear them yelling, "Arouse, arouse," and the word went through, "Don't move, don't move."
Suddenly, the sound of the machine guns started to get louder and louder.
And the guards took off.
And I hear this engine clanking up the road. I knew it was a tank from the sound of it. And this tank comes up with a big American star on it.
And I take a look out and I see that star. I ran down like this. And the guy says, "Where are you from?" "Prisoner of war."
They come over the rise of this hill, and I looked at them. It was the best thing I'd ever seen. They were GIs, and I was free. I was home.
He says, "You hungry?" I says, "Yeah." Italian guy. And he says to me, "Just a minute." And he goes in and he gets a pepperoni that his mother had sent him. He says, "Here." I never had pepperoni before. I didn't know what it was.
This tank operator got me by the arm and flipped me up to the tank and sat me there. How light I was. And that was the end of the slavery.
When you realize this was over, how are you feeling then?
Crying. That's what I did.
Covered in lice, many have lost nearly half their body weight. The 125-mile march has cost another 49 Americans their lives.
They took me to a hospital in Paris.
They had to feed me through a straw because I would get anything near my mouth. I even try to brush my teeth and I would gag. I would stand in front of a mirror and say, "Look, you gotta get over this. You gotta be able to eat."
Even as Berga's GIs recover, a U.S. Army forensics team is setting out with the men's diaries to reconstruct the path of the death march, uncover the victims, and hunt down those responsible for the crime. German Sergeant Edwin Metz is captured just 10 miles away from Berga and sentenced to death.
They were convicted and sentenced to hang, but you had this attitude in the War Department to focus more on the Soviets, to make use of the Nazis who could provide intelligence or could help us in our missile programs, our rocket programs.
They gave him a death sentence and then commuted it to time served, which was 5 years it took him to get around to doing that. And they sent him home. He died an old man.
They went back, family, lived a regular life again. You know, that should not have been.
This guy should have been shot.
For Berga's GIs, there has been no justice. But thanks to Tony's diary, recognition for their sacrifice has finally come. Today, Tony and Norman are visiting the Holocaust Memorial Museum together for the first time.
Tony, for 50 years, nobody even knew I was in the service, much less POW. I was ashamed of it. I wouldn't want to tell anybody.
We always kept maintaining a prayer with the idea that, listen, we have to survive this. We have to get out of here.
I almost lost it when I saw the boxcar. For some reason, that brought back a lot of stuff that I thought I'd buried forever. I'm not gonna sleep tonight, I'll tell you.
Berga artifacts, like Tony's diary and Norman's dog tags, will go on permanent exhibit here. Helping the world remember a story nearly lost to history that these aging GIs can never forget.
Have you had nightmares?
Yes. My ex-wife, then she didn't understand. I'd get up and walk out of the house and sit at the steps outside and cry. And she didn't understand why I was crying and why I had those traumas.
When I got home, I told my mother and father and my brother, who's 5 years my junior, that I would try and answer any questions they had, that I would tell them whatever I knew or I could tell them. But then I would appreciate it if they didn't bring it up again. And we talked 2-3 hours. And they never brought it up again, except on April 20th every year, my dad would send me a birthday card. That was my liberation day. That was the first day of the rest of my life.